Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you a book review from the Most Wanted series, and it's special edition number 4, The Haunter. I'm going to say up front, this book has a lot of things going for it that remind me of some of my favorite Goosebumps books in all of the franchise. Um, this book could have been easily one of my favorite books ever written, but it has some problems that take it back from me, and I can't really say it's a favorite. But I will say there's a lot of things similar to some of my favorite Goosebumps books out there. This is one of those books that offer great characterization, gives you a likable protagonist with honest feeling writing to them. Um, it gives you some great relationship building throughout the story, and there's relationships that kind of evolve, which is very rare in a Goosebumps story. Usually relationships don't change all that much, but this book offers that. A lot of what the main character goes through is an internal struggle, kind of reminiscent to classic books like The Haunted Mask that make it universally loved. I mean, this book has a lot of similarities to some of like the best Goosebumps books, but I wouldn't say it's one of the best books. It does have its issues, and I'll get into them later on in the video, like I said. But I just want to say up front, this book has a lot going for it, and off the bat, I would definitely recommend it if you have never read it. So that being said, let me get into the plot overview without giving too much away. So the plot in a Most Wanted Special Edition kind of circumvents around this structure of a prologue, and then you have maybe one or two parts in the middle, and then an ending part which kind of wraps up the story. This book is that formula. Starts off with a prologue, then it goes into part 2, then part 3, and then part 4. So the epilogue starts, and it kind of foreshadows events later on that happen in part 3 of the story, and it centers around this kid named Sammy, about to do something really strange on a stage in the auditorium of his school building. It was recently revealed that their field trip got canceled, and something came over Sammy to want to go and crash the principal and the mayor's assembly speech in the auditorium. And he cuts into, let me explain what happened before, and that's when it cuts into part 2. And Sammy basically lays it out for you as the reader that he is a soft-spoken and outspoken, kind of quiet kid who keeps to himself. He has like one good friend named Buzzy, and him and Buzzy are really close. And like Goosebumps normally does with the quiet, soft-spoken kid, he has a bully named Reuben. And Reuben is this big, bulky guy, and he has like big hands, and he's kind of a slob. He eats things in one gulp. He has like a dry sense of humor, immature sense of humor, kind of, in a lot of ways. And Sammy's really pestered by Reuben, and he feels kind of taken back from being his full self because of Reuben, and it kind of inhibits his confidence in a way. And it gets into his confidence, and also explains that it kind of gets in the way of him talking to his crush named Summer. Now, Summer is described now for once in a Goosebumps book, there's been other books to kind of describe how, feelings happen with kids, like, 11 to 12-year-old kids. But Sammy basically is written as a kid who is smitten by this girl, and he openly calls her hot, which I don't know if that's like a good adjective to use in a Goosebumps book, but anyway, he describes this girl, Summer, as this hot girl. She's just really pretty, and she seems like a nice person, but she hardly ever talks to Sammy, and Sammy thinks it has something to do maybe with his confidence, and, plus if he ever wanted to try to talk to her, Reuben would, mess with that and just make his life miserable because of it. So Sammy doesn't really try to talk to Summer. But that all changes one day. It's a little bit before Halloween, and his teacher, her name is Miss Flake, wants to split up the class into 3 groups for a Halloween project assignment, which you have to work on as a group. And somehow Sammy and his friend Buzzy get put into the same group along with 4 other kids. Those 4 kids, including Reuben the bully, Summer, the girl that Sammy has a crush on, this kid named Todd, maybe it's maybe one more kid, a girl named Misty, and a girl named Shamika. So I think there's 5 other kids on top of Reuben, and so there's 7 kids total. And they get this creative project assignment for Halloween to do haunted houses. Now Buzzy had come up with this idea, potentially, that Sammy was not on board with, because Sammy, along with being outspoken and shy, he's also very scared. And he has no interest in going into a haunted house around Halloween. You know, he's just not about that. But Buzzy comes up with this idea that the local haunted house, the Marble House, would be a great place to go and ghost hunt and kind of provide proof for Miss Flake that ghosts really do exist. And this will ensure that they all get A's. And Sammy shoots down the idea, but little did he know that Buzzy went and told Reuben about it, and Reuben thought it was such a great idea. He invites Sammy and Buzzy and the rest of the group over to Reuben's house to discuss the plan. Now, Sammy does not want to go to Reuben's house. Sammy does not like Reuben at all. But, you know, Reuben, he's not like the textbook bully. He's not like, I don't want to be around you, stay away from me. He's more of like the inviting type of bully. Like, he'll invite you and just mess with you just to do it because, you know, he doesn't want to seem like a bad guy, but he kind of is, and he doesn't really acknowledge that about himself. That's kind of what Reuben is in a nutshell. But anyway, Sammy reluctantly goes to the house, maybe to convince the kids that, hey, we can come up with another idea. But when he gets there, he kind of realizes that nobody's really on board with that. Also, Reuben plays a pretty mean prank, very mean-spirited prank, where he gets basically cat pee all over his pants. Now, this makes Sammy really upset, but he has to, you know, suck it up and stick through it. He doesn't even get a slice of pizza because Reuben's such a bad host. He eats all the pizza. But they basically say, all 7 of us need to go to the Marble House on Halloween night because we're going to bring this ghost hunting equipment that Shamika's dad has, and we're going to try to capture maybe some audio or maybe some footage using a camera. And I think Buzzy is the one that had the camera idea to bring the camera. And they disperse, and Sammy gets to talk to Summer, and Summer says, you know, that was really mean for what he did to you. You know, he's a really big jerk, and Sammy agrees, and then they part ways. And Sammy's, you know, kind of taken back that Summer's giving him attention and whatnot. And then he goes home and he wants to convince his parents, like, if I tell my parents, they're not going to let me do this. No adult's going to be there to chaperone and whatnot. But his parents are kind of like the textbook, like, there but not there kind of parents that Goosebumps sometimes has. And they're like, well, we're proud of you for being brave and doing this with a group of kids. Go ahead and have fun. So Sammy's taken back and he's like, all right, I really don't want to do this, but I guess I will. So Sammy and Buzzy meet up to go to the Marble House. Now, Sammy and Buzzy think that Reuben is going to prank them at the house. They have pretty strong suspicion given Reuben's track record. And they're waiting outside and they're playing around with the camera, and they notice this green light coming from the window. And they're trying to take a picture, and something happens, and the camera gets broken, the lens falls off, and they're like, this has to be Reuben's prank. And much to their chagrin, they turn around and they notice that Reuben, Summer, Todd, and Shamika were coming towards the house, and Reuben was never in the house to begin with. And the kids, you know, they all meet up, and, you know, Sammy and Buzzy don't tell them about what happened in the window, and they try to go open the front door, and the door's not opening according to Reuben, and Sammy thought it was a prank, and then he's like, oh no, the door really isn't opening, and it's starting to rain and storm outside. It's Halloween night, a rainy, stormy Halloween night. There's no real trick-or-treaters. I guess some of the kids are wearing costumes, but it's, it doesn't really feel like Halloween in the atmosphere in this part of the story, but it kind of is at the same time. So they enter through the window, and they find this room to set up things, but before they find the room, Sammy feels like he hears a whisper, and it kind of sets him off, and he kind of loses his train of thought and where he's at. And when he finds the kids, they thought that he chickened out and left, but little did they know, Sammy was still there. But anyways, they set up the ghost hunting equipment. Ruben has the flashlight. They don't have a camera anymore, but they still have the sound recording thing they can use, and they can use other forms of ways to communicate by, maybe sitting in a circle and calling the ghosts, which Summer does, and she asks for proof that the ghost was there, and they hear knocking, and there's a very suspenseful build-up there that culminates in Misty coming in late, because she left late and she arrived late. But Misty finally shows up, and basically the kids wait around for about an hour and nothing happens until, Sammy thinks he heard something and he wants to play back something on the recorder that Shamika brought, and when they play it, there's a very ominous message. And the kids all thought that Ruben did it, but turns out that Ruben didn't actually do it, and then the message mysteriously disappears, and then Sammy has this frightening ordeal where he feels this cold tingle on the back of his neck, and he goes ice cold, and all these kids are watching and concerned because it looks very weird. And then once Sammy goes through that, they all agree to leave because it was getting late and it was almost midnight, and they have to find out a way to get grades on this project now. So then it cuts into part 3, after Halloween night a few days later, to back at school. And Sammy now is starting to exhibit weird behavior. Now, what I mean by this is it's very similar to Son of Slappy, with the main character of that book being influenced by Slappy to do certain things. Same thing with Sammy here, except the stuff he does is pretty outlandish and very silly in this part. And this is the part of the story that kind of detracted me from enjoyment in a little bit of ways. Like, there's a scene where there's this whole ordeal with him getting tripped up by Ruben in the classroom, and the whole class laughs at him, and then all of a sudden this voice in his head tells him to start doing jumping jacks on his desk. And then his teacher gives him a stern talking to, sends him to the clinic lady, and then he shoves the sandwich into the lady's mouth and starts eating pillows. And then he gets sent to the principal's office. He sneaks out. Sorry, I'm confusing parts of the story. He sneaks out of the clinic and somehow evades. The clinic lady goes home. The clinic lady says, "Hey, something was wrong at school." The clinic lady called and said that you had inhibited strange behavior, and he was trying to be honest with his parents, but his parents didn't want to hear what he had to say. It was very weird. But he goes to school the next day, and the whole thing at the assembly happened, where he goes to the assembly, back to the beginning in the prologue, where he goes to the assembly and he starts tap dancing and clucking like a rooster on stage and making the mayor of the town dance with him and embarrassing the principal. But then the principal lets it slide and lets him go back to class. And turns out it's like lunchtime, and he goes to the lunchroom and everybody's like cheering him on. He's now become popular. Summer, the girl who never gave him the time of day, now wants him to sit with her at lunch, but he has to talk with Buzzy and come clean about it. And when Sammy starts talking with Buzzy in the lunch line, the voice comes out of nowhere again because Ruben was around, and it says, "Do a cartwheel into spaghetti." And then he does it, and then the spaghetti flies on Ruben, and then Ruben pounds on Sammy. And of course, Sammy gets sent home. And Sammy goes home, and his parents are questioning his behavior, and he's like, you're not listening to me, and this is what's happening, but nothing's really working. And then, after another chance, Sammy basically goes back to school and he's told to start um, doing more dangerous stuff. And this is what cuts into part 4. Sammy, at first, climbed on top of the school's, building top and started dancing and tap dancing and fell off and landed on the principal. And the principal was really upset, and of course he got sent home for doing that. And then on his way home, or walking around one day, he thought, the voice said, hey, go rescue that cat in the tree. There was no cat in the tree, there was no leaves on the tree, but he's still climbing this barren tree and had to get rescued from the fire department. And it comes to find out that Sammy thinks that whatever is possessing him is trying to kill him. And he starts to try to communicate with the spirit, and the spirit responds. And the spirit responds by saying that once you die, we can have fun forever. And basically, I'm going to skip a little bit because it gets very spoilerish. Basically, Sammy discovers the voice inside of his head is this long, since-to-be-dead boy named Benjamin Marple. Now, Benjamin Marple was said to be struck by lightning and his body turned into literal dust. And that'll play into the ending, but I'll get into that in just a sec. But he somehow has lived on in the spirit world and has, joined Sammy in his body. And Sammy has had enough and wants to get his body back, and he goes back to the Marple house to kind of get rid of Benjamin. And then it's revealed that something happened to Sammy. And now Sammy and Benjamin are both ghosts, right? So they go back to school, to his class, and Benjamin wants to show him around how to be a ghost. And they play this prank on Reuben, and they get some type of revenge on Reuben. And then Sammy realizes something isn't right, and he wants to be alive again. And this whole situation happens. And then the ending happens where there's a coming-of-age type of end to this story, where it's like a good and bad ending for Sammy. Like, he wins in the end, but he also loses. And I'll leave it at that. But that, in a nutshell, is The Haunter. Let me go off with the strengths about the story first. I think a lot of the strengths with this book, like I said, is the characterization and relationship building. I think Sammy feels like an honest character. Honestly, I don't feel like there's any filler in this book. I know a couple people have told me that they think this book is riddled with filler. I really don't think there's filler in the story. I just think that the story just kind of got a little silly, and it didn't take itself too seriously, and there was some holes of logic. But I don't think there was any filler in this book, which is surprising for a book that's 175 pages. I thought it was pretty well done on that aspect. Some of the scenes in this, I don't think I brought it up in the plot overview, but there is some scary scenes, like where Sammy has this premonition dream about the boy at the Marple house, and there's a really vivid description about how he's just staring into like Sammy's eyes with no eyes and just blackness and deep eye sockets. That's very creepy. And as well, even putting aside the silliness aspect in some parts of the story here, if you're able to put that aside and just think about what's happening to Sammy in this story, it's very creepy. It's very unnerving. Like, something about a possession story, I guess it might do a little bit better for me than some, but it's very disturbing to think about, what's actually happening to Sammy. And there's a lot of good nail-biting suspense in this story. Not a lot of red herring, oddball, here you go, like, we're going to throw this little monkey wrench, but it's not going to amount to anything. Not too much of that. It was pretty straightforward and just kept building on itself, which I really enjoyed. In the ending, I'm not going to lie, I'm not the biggest fan of the ending, but I think it works enough to where I actually think it suits the story a bit. But getting into the negatives, my negatives with this story, unfortunately, kind of stem down to two things here. And that is the message of the story because of the ending. I'm not saying the ending's bad. I think it's the message of the ending. And I think it's the silliness that was out throughout the part 3 and part 4 of this. And also, maybe a little bit of plot hole things going on here. But I guess I'll start off with the little things, like the plot hole stuff. Like, when it comes down to the revelation with Benjamin Marple, especially with the end, I'm not going to spoil it, but there is a loophole that Stein try to work around, trying to make that ending make sense with Benjamin. I don't know how that was able to be passed. That was one of the glaring things I noticed about the end, is like, how did that actually happen? The missing logic in that part really got to me a little bit. Yeah, so I felt like I needed to bring that up as a negative because it's blatantly there. Another thing I thought was really odd about this story is how silly it was in that part 3. You know, the parts that worked was the parts when it was revealed that Benjamin was like trying to physically harm Sammy, but all of these like weird little mannerism things that he was making him do, like jumping jacks and dancing around and clucking like a rooster, I kind of wish that Stein just went to the more serious stuff, like maybe having Sammy do more dangerous things. Kind of would have elevated the tension, I think, better, and would have kept that tone going into part 4 a whole lot better. I just think that Stein's choice of silliness really bogged down that part 3, because once the part 2 ended, now the reader's wanting to know what's going to happen next, and it gives you that. I mean, that can really disconnect some people there. And then let's get into the overall message of the ending. I think this is a negative for me because, like I said, Sammy wins and loses at the end. But I think the ending is kind of a metaphor for, you know, change, and, you know, it is a coming of age type of ending. I'm not gonna lie, it is like that. There is, you know, some subtext of change that happened with Sammy, and maybe some sort of sacrifice that he has to make to be happy at the end of the day. But it doesn't really come off realistic at all. Like, I know Sammy wins on one hand with the whole summer thing, but Sammy also loses because of the big twist. I don't know, and I guess it's kind of stemmed from the lack of logic of the twist itself. I don't know if I like that, if that's a good message, right? Like, you know, Sammy lives in misery, but at least he's about to sacrifice his future, maybe. He's about to, you know, do some really bad things that can harm his life forever. But he gets the girl? Like, I don't know. I don't know if I like that. It just makes no sense. I don't know. It's kind of ham-fisted a little bit there. But yeah, overall with The Haunter, I think there's a lot good going for it than negative. So I think I will give it around a 4 or higher. Now, where I landed exactly with this is that those problems, like I mentioned, with like the message at the end and the silliness and the lack of logic in the twist, like just left a little bit of plot holes going on. They added up to like a full point off for me. So I gave this a 4 out of 5. I think it's pretty deserved there. I think it's like a solid 4 out of 5. It's above average, but on the lower end of that. But it's still a good book. I still recommend this book if you haven't read it. It's very reminiscent to some of the better character building books. It has good internal monologue. It has good internalized struggles. It has a coming of age feel. It has something different to offer with like romance and stuff. Definitely recommend it. It's not the scariest book by any means, but it does have its moments of suspense thriller in there that I think will captivate you in the long term for the book. Just be aware of the silliness. So yeah, that's my review for The Haunter. Let me know in the comment section if you have read this book. Did you love it or did you hate it? I'm dying to know, and I'll see you next time.